Sorry.
Anyway, Carlos, you had a question?
Yes, sir.
You had a question?
Barry, I just want to ask, do you think there's social media has any impact on politics, and in particular election outcomes? What do you think?
The short answer, no. Well, it's very difficult to demonstrate. Very difficult to demonstrate. Example, there've been one or two examples where there's been some slight modification of policy. No, I've just forgotten. It's argued there, and that may well be true. But if you look at, say, a particular election outcome or the result of a pre-selection or something of the sort, I'd be pathetically eager to find an example of where it's operated, but I don't know of one.
Lachlan, and then Danny.
I think I heard you say that there's no effective place for deliberation and debate in the politic of Australia, in Parliament or the media or on social media. Is the problem more that the system we've got isn't being worked properly, or that the system itself needs to be changed?
I think the system. I think the system is not all that bad. But I think what's happened is that you've got the people who are determining what happens in the Parliament day by day, week by week, and so on. They're preoccupied by tactics and not by strategy. So in other words, very often it's a matter of saying who's going to get the big headline for the day. What's going to be today's big news story? Don't worry about last week, worry about today. Did we win today? Were we on top? So the result is that we'll say that an issue like the Bronwyn Bishop thing is having a bit of a run, because it's the sort of issue people can identify with. Not all that complicated, and so on. It's not a wicked problem in the sense that you've got these immense complexities. It's fairly sort of straightforward, because you can say, oh yes, I can imagine hiring a helicopter. I can imagine it if somebody else paid for it, and therefore it's a kind of human interest story. But at the moment, you see, part of the tactic is to wedge what people do, the way people operate. Now, something I've been in my sort of kind of a nightmare seemed to me. I think if you think of the war on terror and so on, supposing that Tony Abbott, with an election coming up, said, well, we're going to reimpose the death penalty for acts of terrorism. Where there have been multiple killings, we'll reimpose the death penalty. And then that's up to the Labor Party to say, well, given our long history on the issue, what do we do? But then they'd say, but we don't want to be wedged. We don't want to be wedged by what the government is doing. So, maybe we'll say we'll go along with it, knowing there'd be a lot of unhappy people. But those unhappy people would still say we're still better than the other mob. But I can imagine that happening. And I'm not certain that Labor wouldn't in fact say, well, look, in the circumstances, maybe.
Danny?
Just go along with it.
Barry, once again, there are about 3 million issues we could go into.
Yeah.
I'll keep myself to one. It was your last point where you talked about how you were surprised in a country with 4.5 million graduates don't have a much more expansive political discourse. Yeah. Isn't the issue graduates of what? In the sense, and I guess I'm referring to the debasement of the study of humanities.
Oh. Yeah.
The question was, isn't the issue graduates of what?
Yeah.
Rather than just the 4.5 million
particularly
graduates.
in the circumstances where we've got a federal minister running around saying we must make maths compulsory, he's forgetting that there's a broader field there. Would you like to comment on that?
Oh, that's certainly a very important factor. I suppose what I think was, at least there's some degree about the, you know, the evaluation of evidence and going through all those sort of processes. That doesn't seem to operate. I mean, it's something I've thought about a lot. If you go back, say, going back a very, very, very long time, say to the American presidential election of 1860, which I can hardly remember, when Lincoln won, the quality of debate around that, and say his Cooper Union speech, was extraordinarily sophisticated. And when you reflect, the number of people who had tertiary qualifications was about zip. But still, they could see a nuanced argument. Nobody would ever undertake
A team of rivals, really.
Exactly. Nobody would ever undertake a debate at that kind of level now, because they say, oh, the electorate wouldn't, they'd turn off and be terrible. And,
well, a bit of a hopeful thing. There was one state politician who shall remain nameless who put me onto Team of Rivals and that whole era, so that was a bit hopeful. Dennis, you have a question?
You're saying how now they're scared of getting into a wedge. Now, that wasn't always the case, and I'm just wondering how and when that happened. Like in 1966, Labor will wipe that over Vietnam. But instead of saying, well, we need to change our policy because the people don't like it, they said, no, we've got to sell our policy better because we know it's right. So when did it change, and how did it change that they won't do that anymore?
Well, I mean, that's a very good point, because in 66 we got wiped out, but by 69, you know, the tide was moving in the other direction. The point was, you had people in the party who felt passionately about Vietnam. Now you have people in the party who feel passionately about getting jobs.
Barry, I'm really interested in how we get back to courage and proper strategy and good social policy.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in, well, how much of that really is about getting a party process working properly, and I'm interested in some comment on democratisation of the Labor Party and moving away from some of this culture that's become also a culture of professionalisation of the job market within the party system.
So how does the process get back to a proper democratised process?
And part of that is you talk about strategy versus tactics. My personal experience as 30 years in the public service is that the political advisory system and media advisors overshadow the sound policy papers you were putting up. The debate becomes much more.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, several things. First of all, the number of people who are active in major political parties is very, very small. See, if you think when they had the election postal ballot, so it's a bit suspicious, the postal ballot for national president, there were 19,400 people voted. Now that's an average of 129 in each federal electorate. Now, if you assume that only half of those people were actually alive, probably about a fair, then you see you're getting down to 60, 65 in each federal electorate. That's tiny compared to the number of people who will be casting a vote for one party or another. So the result is that people really, I think you've got enough people who feel really a bit repelled by the system and just don't want to be involved.
Well, can we bring that question back with Peter's question and modify the CIR to the proposition of primaries? Would our system be better by having primaries for the election processes?
Yes, I mean, I think it's worth, they did in fact experiment with it in New South Wales, and then it just seems to have fizzled out. I mean, what I'm conscious of is there's no way I could win even if I were 30 years younger, no way I could win a pre-selection now. I'm not even sure about you.
Yeah, agreed. Yes.
I grew up in the American school system,
Yep.
university system, and we had as a subject at secondary school civics, and at university we could take a subject, politics, government, what have you. And when I moved to this country, I was amazed how many people know nothing about how their government operates. They know nothing about how it's structured. They have sort of a cultural cringe about the word politics. And at a political conference one time, I suggested that we should be teaching civics in our schools so that people that are growing up understand government and why we have government and roles of government. And a politician said to me, his answer was, oh, no, we wouldn't teach that in the schools. That's for the political parties to teach. So he didn't even understand what the word civics was.
No.
And it goes back to your earlier statement about people at university are approaching you about getting into politics because they see that as a career.
That's right.
They don't understand the role of government in even making that approach to you, about what, because they have no ambition about what they can achieve as a politician.
The question.
So why do we not teach it in our schools?
Questions about civics
some
in schools?
Some schools and some systems do. I think they still do in Victoria, but in a somewhat attenuated way. Don't know about the South Australian situation.
Okay. William says yes, they do.
Yeah, I learned it in year 7.
Yeah, but it's certainly not perhaps regarded as not given the priority that it ought to be given. One of the difficulties, I think, I was going to just drop this in. I've always actually been a supporter of something which is an Australian innovation, the concept of compulsory voting. But I can see that there's a bit of an argument you can put against it. And one of the arguments against it is that if you've got that it tends to consolidate two existing parties, both of which you might argue were crummy, but it consolidates them, provides them with public funding, and you don't have to get out the vote, because the vote's going to come anyway. So the result is that, and I was at a seminar that the University of Tasmania put on a few months ago. We made quite an interesting argument about the difficulty that what was intended as a reform mechanism, i.e. public funding of election campaigns, because it said, well, you wouldn't then be dependent on donations from the private sector, you wouldn't be dependent on interest groups like gambling and so on getting into it. Well, forget it. It all simply means they spend more, and they say, well, we've got a base of X million dollars, and it means that no other party, unless it gets over 5% of the vote. See, I think, what is it, $3.40 or something or other you get for every vote cast if you've got over that 5%. So that it then makes the parties extremely resistant to internal reform, very resistant.
So the mendacious and the cowardly keep on facing each other off.
Yeah.
You were making me a bit nervous there, Barry, before when you said about the fact that you wouldn't get pre-selected today, and maybe I wouldn't either. And I was a bit had cold shudders about that. But Andrew Lee managed to work himself through the system.
Well, you'd have to say the ACT is not a conspicuously large trade union area,
Yeah.
and it's no doubt actually it was curious because you had two excellent candidates in that particular particular pre-selection. That's quite true. But he is, I think, very much an exception in that.
Yeah. I do take the point you're making, and I think you're right. Are there any other questions? Jan, again at the back.
Thanks so much, Barry. Barry, I just wanted to ask your thoughts about, you would recall, we'd all recall Rudd's, I forget what it was called, the think tank for 1,000 people, whatever it was called.
Oh.
And the really important point, I think, was there were 8,000 people or more who actually wanted to participate. What that really was, and some of us went to great lengths to advocate for this, that there was an enormous need for citizen engagement around some of the big ticket items like climate change and other things, and we've kept the momentum going. around those community conversations, around those issues of great importance to the country and to the states and to the localities. What are your thoughts around that whole citizen engagement?
Well, the short answer is I think it didn't work, and part of the problem was that a number of the people who were chairing the sessions decided that that all decisions would be done on the basis of consensus. Now that meant, in effect, unanimity. If you had a small group, so I won't agree with that. So, well, sorry, that hasn't been carried. So that, if I could just tell you a short story, but I think it is quite funny. Glyn Davis, who's the Vice Chancellor of Melbourne, was the co-chair with Kevin Rudd of the whole process. And I remember after the conference, after the 2020 summit, Glyn convened a meeting of people who'd been delegates who were part of Melbourne University. So I was there at that. And remember we broke up into these streams. And I remember somebody got up and said, well, first I want to say the stream that I was at was undoubtedly the worst stream of the whole summit, you see. And round the table people said, nonsense, nonsense, mine was worse, mine was worse. And so the result is that you would think that there was something that absolutely in the line of the bleeding obvious. I mean, for example, you couldn't get a resolution about renewable energy through because you had, I don't know, 5% of the group said, no, we won't agree with that. And so, oh, well, we can't do it. But I've got to say, and this is very Adelaide University, the one person who actually took a quite sympathetic view of the conference, of the summit, was in fact John Coetzee.
Oh yeah.
And John said, look, I think you're too harsh on the summit, but he said, from my point of view,
from the South African context, yeah,
that's right. But he said, from my point of view, he said, I grew up in a country where, until the age of, I don't know, 50 or something, I never believed anything that the government said. And the idea of being brought together to be part of a process where they said, well, tell us what you think, would have seemed quite inconceivable. So he said, I come from one tradition, and I think it's a bit of a revelation. You come from another tradition, and you're a bit disappointed. I can understand it, but from my point of view, it's better than what I've been used to.
Yeah. Maybe, Frank, do you want to make a comment on for the changed environments?
Yeah, I mean, I can totally understand that. I'm a South African background. But by New Zealand for 20 years, we're of course dabbled with MMP and still.
Yeah.
And you talk about social media. I remember an election maybe 8 or 10 years ago where they had a thing called a worm. Do we have that in Australia?
Yes. I think it originated here.
And Peter Dunn, who had absolutely no party at all, was elected, and because he got just on the strength of his worm, and suddenly had to find 12 MPs because that was the number of votes that he was entitled to, and stacked the parliament.
Yeah.
But just coming back to being able to speak for yourself, one of the things we had to teach our children, which I still find extremely hard, coming out of the South African background pre-1994, is if you're in trouble, go to a policeman because he will help. That is not something that I grew up with.
Yeah.
No.
Thanks, Frank, for that. Now, you said, Barry, to me before that I was one of only 2 people born in Durban that you know.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that Frank is the only person born in Howick that you know in South Africa. So. Okay, that's a bit of private. Okay, are there any more questions? If not, I want to say thank you very much indeed for coming today, and Barry, thank you very much. And how the world has changed over 50 years. 50 years ago, we had a talkback station, a program with Jones, and today we have a talkback station with Jones. Barry was one of the first, or the first, talkback host in Australia. Of course, we know there's another Jones today who's a talkback host, and how the nature of debate has changed. So I still hold, with a degree of sanguinity, that we have reached the bottom and will climb up, thanks to the kind of